Hi there, everyone. So, like so many people on the planet right now, and maybe off planet too, I don't know, I'm feeling a lot of energy. Some of it's nervous, some of it's excited, some of it's fascinated, all kinds of things at the same time. So, I'm here today to talk about it is Zion Shvat, the 7th of Shvat. It is, like I said yesterday, my anniversary, the birth of my first child, my son, who was born exactly a year later on my anniversary, and a very special day for me. So I'm going to talk just a drop about that later, a little bit more down the line. I want to just talk about the matrix. I want to talk about what's going on. And, I like to, what I talk about often isn't at the level of where I'm actually thinking what I'm actually um, seeing, researching, concluding, and experiencing. Because I know we're all types of people here and we're all in different places. And it's really important, for everybody to absorb information in their own way. Each one of us has tremendous biases. That includes me, of course. We are biased toward how we know things to be, how we've always known things to be, to the point where it's almost impossible to believe in something, even if you're seeing it, if it contradicts what you quote unquote know to be true, know to be possible, know to be real. Actually, this is a very important principle in all transformation and in the process of the unfolding of Geula, of redemption, of destiny as well, because there are things that are happening, things that are available, possibilities that God is putting on the table every single second, but we are not stepping into them or even really seeing them because of these biases. But I'm not really going to talk about that right now. What I want to talk about is something much more present tense. Today's the day of the quote unquote inauguration. There's a lot of energy around it. I have a lot of opinions on what's happening, but what I want to tell you is I want to just couch this conversation in terms of the idea of three movies. Number one, The Matrix. If you saw The Matrix, most people did. You understand that the theme is that humanity is generating energy for a simulated reality that's run not by them. And it's more or less comfortable, but it's not real. And that's from there we have the idea of the red pill, which is the pill that people would take if they wanted to get out of that matrix, and the blue pill that they would take if they wanted to stay in it. That's one thought. And I think that's where the concept of the matrix, we're in the matrix, we're out of the matrix. Of course, I do divine matrix healing because the matrix really means the core framework in which we all live and things are created and sustained. So the ultimate matrix is God's matrix, the divine matrix, the Geula matrix. But inside of that, there are all these other matrices. What are they? They are versions of reality. They're actually living fields that have their own morphic fields, that have their own laws of cause and effect. But the movie, The Matrix, they do say that Hollywood does a lot of information, predictive programming, where they put ideas in people's heads through the medium of entertainment. And that makes things more believable. That kind of prepares people for things. So I just want to mention The Matrix. I want to then mention the Truman Show. I don't know if as many people saw the Truman Show. I just rewatched it like in the last year sometime. It's quite cute. This really innocent guy, Truman, is living his life in this very peaceful place where everything's repetitive, everything's kind of saccharine. He goes to work. He's married. He has his parents. He has his house. And meanwhile, he's living in this giant bubble. He doesn't know it. And everybody pretty much in the world is watching him 24/7 on TV as he's moving through this life that he thinks is real. But in fact, here we again have a programmed reality, that idea. The last example that just came to my mind is The Wizard of Oz, which used to be one of my very favorite movies and books. I had so many of them. It was like a Wizard of Oz book. There was a whole series. Anyway, what's the deal with The Wizard of Oz? He was great and powerful, the great and powerful Oz, until the little dog Toto pulled the curtain from off the screen where he was manipulating this mechanical voice. And basically, what was the Wizard of Oz? A guy who figured out how to brainwash people, how to create a Truman-like reality, a matrix that everybody was living into. Last example, how about The Emperor's New Clothes? That story. the story of the Emperor's New Clothes, and probably everybody knows it, but just in case you don't, you know, an emperor, somebody came to the emperor and said, I'm going to make you a wonderful suit of clothes. It's so magical. It's going to look invisible to you, but it is magnificent. And when you wear it, everybody's going to be in awe. So the emperor was all excited, and bottom line, you know, he thought he was putting on these magical clothes and he wasn't wearing any clothes. So he was walking around, parading around naked, and everybody was like lauding the magnificent clothes, even though they could see that he was naked. They didn't want to say so. They were afraid to say so. And then suddenly a little kid is like, the emperor has no clothes. And that blew the whole thing apart. So I want to tell you, like it or don't like it. Like I've had people unsubscribe from me as I get, you know, closer to expressing what I actually believe, which isn't neutral. I believe that there's such a thing as right and wrong, good and evil in the world. This is embedded in the Torah. I've been telling you all along that we're in a spiritual war. We always have been. Always, always. Since even before the world existed, but certainly in our human level, starting with the Garden of Eden and the, you know, the godliness and the beauty and the fearlessness and the no death, no struggle, no poverty, no separation. Adam and Eve saw it from one end of the universe to the other in one glance. And then there was the snake. And that war, God's voice, snake voice, you know, or Moses, Pharaoh, you know, the contrast of the war has always taken place in every generation. It's a fractal, actually. So it occurs not just in global themes and, you know, national themes, but it occurs within us. There's always a spiritual war between the animalistic tendencies and the godly tendencies, between the body and the soul. Ultimately, everything is meant to reconcile and operate as one, not by mushing into some kind of, you know, I can only think of a word I shouldn't say, some kind of extremely compromised version of oneness that really is requires everything to squish itself and to pretend to be what it's not. No, real oneness is when everything gets to express. The truth becomes more and more visible. The good and the light begins to shine. The darkness, which is only a shell, falls off. Everything's exposed for what it is, and then there can be true unity. So what's happening in our world? It's Inauguration Day. It's my opinion, but it's so based on so much research and watching for the last 5 at least years. Actually, really more than that. I really started watching kind of closely in 2007 when I found out that when I found out that the Federal Reserve was not a federal agency at all, but a group of private banks, international, that was somehow controlling the economy of the U.S. Anyway, that said, so, and with all the censorship, you know, I'm a little bit concerned to say things straight up. But what I want to say is that it looks like there's going to be a dual reality, like a Truman show, you know, hide behind the screen, emperors wearing clothes in the Matrix reality that's going to be inaugurated probably in the next hour or so. From when I'm doing this video live, if you're watching a replay, we'll already know if something happened. It may or may not right now, but underneath the surface, there is a different thing happening, and it's a real different thing happening. There are different powers that have been evoked. There are different changes that have happened in banking systems and governments. There are a lot of details about this, which I've been following and avidly consuming for a very long time, because my nature is to want to know what's really going on. And the fear, this is one way that you can tell. That you can tell if something is coming from the side of good or not, even in you. So when something provokes massive fear, that's a red flag. Fear has been weaponized. Watch for that. Where do you see fear? Where do you hear that you should be really afraid? And wherever that is, that's weaponized fear. Information sharing is another story. Free and open information sharing is great. Is that happening? I mean, what I see is that there's massive censorship, so that anybody who wants to share anything that's not the established narrative has to be afraid of being shut down. So that's an interesting thing. That's what they did in the Truman Show when things, you know, when Truman started to figure out that something weird is happening here. So they're madly, you know, in the control center, they're like, shut off the screen, stop and close the road, don't let him go. It's like that right now. So we've been fed a narrative. We've been fed a system of beliefs over many, many decades. This is really true, you guys. Believe it or not, it doesn't matter if you believe it. I just got to share it. It's Zion Shabbat. It's the 70 years since the Rebbe's leadership. It is a holy day. It is a holy month. It is a holy time. It is a holy year. So part of what we have to do, part of what we will do, whether we want to or not, is see that there's more going on underneath the surface. See that the core job, the core mission, I believe I've said this before, but the core mission of the Jewish people, the souls of Israel, is that they have been carriers of the Torah on behalf of all mankind throughout thousands of years of persecution and exile and wandering and so forth. There are reasons for that I won't go into now, but the time has come to share. But what about the mission of the nations of the world? Everybody that isn't their mission. That's a small portion of the population, but that we're all in it together. So what's everyone else's mission? To create a world, to co-create a world of justice and righteousness, of truth and good, of godliness, not manipulative, not violent, not hedonistic. And I don't mean people shouldn't have pleasure. Pleasure's great. Not exploitive. Not like pigs wallowing in the mud, not like thieves sneaking into your house in the night, not like people twisting your brain and manipulating you, as so many governments and groups have done throughout all of history. This didn't start now. We have always been in a state of spiritual war. It is coming to its head at this point. So what's happening under the surface? Under the surface, the Truman Show is being run by the group that is inaugurating today, supposedly. We'll see what happens. And underneath the surface, something much deeper is happening that is rewinding, that is bringing back justice and righteousness. And that's the job of the nations of the world. As part of the Messianic process, the Jews have to share the Torah in ways that are inclusive to everybody. And because Torah is for everybody. We don't all celebrate it or keep it in exactly the same ways. There's some different laws for the Jewish people at this time than for the nations of the world, but we're all in it together. We're like notes in an orchestra. We're like words in a book. Everybody is absolutely part of this one thing, and everybody has a role. And if you're on the planet right now, your soul's in your body here, it's because you have an essential piece. You have a design function in the universe. Stop and ask yourself for 1 second, what is my design function in the universe? What is my design function in the universe? Every little design function is absolutely necessary for the entire thing to work. No kidding. But part of all of our design function right now is to uncover the truth, to notice that the emperor has no clothes. So underneath the surface, I believe with everything I've got, that there is a large, large group of people. I mean, people across the globe are tired of totalitarianism. They're tired of being run by fear. I was telling you the red flag. So fear is a very, very big red flag. Censorship is a massive flag. If somebody wants to shut you down because you're sharing, I'm not saying being obnoxious, calling names, that's not cool. But if you're sharing information with a good heart, nobody has to listen or believe, but to be shut down, to control what information gets out or doesn't get out, red flag. Movements that attempt to destroy the normal Torah foundations of what is right and wrong, giant red flag. Okay, and there are more, but that's what's coming to my mind at this instant. I don't want to take too much of your time because there are all kinds of exciting things happening right now. But the idea I want to impart here is that it's time to bust through the matrix. It's time to realize, as Truman, each one of us is Truman, it is time to realize that we are being run, that we are being had, that we are being, peer pressure is keeping us. Do you ever feel like you're afraid to say what you think because people might, they might judge you? They might want to shut you down. They might want to unsubscribe. They might want to unfriend you. Another red flag. That's another red flag. That is not okay. That is not something that we should accept or need to accept. That is not a world of justice and righteousness. That's not a world of unity. That's a world of domination, manipulation, exploitation, and control. And that is what's fundamentally been running us for quite a while. Unbeknownst to us, they're really good at what they do. When I say they, I mean, whoever's behind the global governments and whoever's behind the banks and the corporations. For the most part, I'm speaking in very general terms. Some of you already know this, some of you might not. It's time to find out. It's time to know more. In fact, I'm thinking, maybe if people are interested, you should let me know privately. Email me. at shifra at thegateimmunity.com. If you're interested in a closed Zoom session at some point, so we can talk about these things like in a much more open, specific way. But right now, you need to know that the president flew off in Air Force One. I don't know what's going to happen. He never said the words "I concede," and that's because he didn't concede. And he didn't concede because the vast majority of Americans voted for him. And yet, the people who are sponsoring the Truman Show are trying their best to hide it from you. And in some cases, they are succeeding. Although if you're still here, I don't know, we'll see. We'll see what kind of feedback I get. So trust that good things are happening. Trust that this is a part of Geula. I've gotten feedback from some people who have been with me for a while, who've said, it's not appropriate for a spiritual teacher to talk about politics. I want to tell you, nonsense. The Torah isn't, as the Torah says itself, Torah lo b'shamayim. The Torah is not meant to be lived in heaven. It's not for spiritual people to just think about God. I'm not saying that's not a great thing, but we're here to rectify the world. And when the Rebbe said, open your eyes and see Mashiach, open your eyes and recognize that the Geula is in process, that means look at what's going on around you. And it also means open your eyes in two ways. Open the eyes of the inner awareness. What does that mean? Connect to divine consciousness through the mystical Torah, connect to God, and connect to what's happening on the ground. Notice how things are changing and find God in it. Find Geula in it because it's there. And primarily, what's happening on the surface now is a mad attempt to keep you enrolled in the Truman Show. Don't look, close that road, make a storm. Are things stormy? Do you think it's an accident? Do you think riots are accidental? Do you think that the lies are coming from, innocent mistake? No, it's the Truman Show, you guys. It's the Matrix, and it's time to wake up. And God, Hashem, is helping us wake up. And so are the people who never said, I concede. And they are, I have heard from someone that I trust who's in intelligence, I've heard that it's going to I don't know. There's disinformation everywhere because it's a war, it's a spiritual war. And for some people, it's more than a spiritual war. Why are there 65,000 troops in Washington, D.C. right now? I don't know. But the point is that we need to understand that each one of us is a soldier in this war. Our main job is to see the deeper truth, to see God everywhere, to distinguish what's right from wrong, what's true from false. I gave you some keys, some red flags. If I could remember them all, I'd recite them right now. But when somebody doesn't want to hear you, when someone shuts you down, when there's censorship, when something's driven by fear, all of those are when something is breaking apart or pushing against or almost making what are politically incorrect? Political correctness is a toxic weapon. When fear is weaponized, when opinions are weaponized, when peer pressure is weaponized. We've all been subject to that for quite a few years. We don't have to anymore. We need to see it for what it is and just say no. One last movie I'll reference here, and that is Harry Potter. I've been thinking about this a lot. Harry Potter, if you saw it, one of the lessons that Harry and his friends got was the boggart. So the boggart was kept in this box, and sorry, I know some religious people don't approve of Harry Potter, and that's fine. I'm just using it. Everything's an example. Everything's a learning tool. So when the teacher opened the box, the boggart would come out and it would look exactly like every person's biggest fear. So it would come out if if it was your turn to deal with the boggart, the box would open, the boggart would come out looking like, if it's whatever it might be. I don't even want to say anything scary, but it would be your biggest fear. And the way to get rid of the boggart was to know that it's just a boggart. It's just a fraud. It's just, a man behind a screen. And when you laughed at it, when they would laugh at it, it would dissolve. So the only thing it wasn't always like this. This is the great news I have to tell you. Mashiach and Geula are real. God is great. Okay, the only thing keeping the power of the illusion in force right now is our fear of it. So whether you're afraid of the virus, whether you're afraid of a vaccine, whether you're afraid of a new administration, whether you're afraid of an old administration, whether you're afraid of, I don't know whatever it is, stop being afraid. You have a job. You're a soldier in this war. God put you in your body in this world for that reason. Of course, we each have specific missions and we each have general, part of the general collective. But right now, you must open your eyes and look deeper. I don't care where you are on the spectrum. I don't care how knowledgeable, how ignorant, it doesn't matter. Just know you're being played. Okay? And I've told you some of the red flags. I'm sure there are more. I never know what I'm going to say before I say it, so I didn't plan this exactly. But anyway, notice who's doing what, and notice especially who's censoring and who's weaponizing fear. Those people are not your friends. I don't care what your politics are. It just makes common sense, right? But common sense is very uncommon right now. Okay, all of that said, I just want to conclude with my own little story. It's too long for me to tell the whole thing right here. So you can, again, read it, and I hope you will. It's from today, from quite a few years ago. Changed my life in an instant. You can Google Shifra Hendry and the tapestry, and it will come up. Please do, please read it. Shared a lot around the world at this time. But basically, I was almost an atheist. And even though I wished that there would be such a thing as God in the crazy world, where everything seemed so random, I did not really believe that there was, because it felt too good to be true. And I also had the belief, because of the state of my emotional being at the time. I was very insecure. Didn't feel a deep self-love at that time, it was a long time ago. And my other thought was that if there is a God who's in charge of things, then he doesn't really care about me. Okay? And, traumas in life make us feel that way. A lot of things make us feel that way if our parents somehow give us the impression, willingly or, intentionally or not, usually it's not, that we're not significant or that we're not safe or whatever, that can generate all those feelings. So at one point, and long story short, please go read The Tapestry by Shifra Hendry. Please Google that and do yourself a favor. It's an amazing story. But I just want to tell you that my brother had become observant. I thought he was crazy, but he did invite me to come to his friends for Shabbat meals and whatever. And I liked the atmosphere. Anyway, I went to an event. It was on this day, Zion Shvat, the 7th of Shvat, in 1979. I was quite young. And this event was, Motzi Shabbat was right after the Shabbat, and a rabbi came to speak in Minnesota where I lived. He was from Chicago. That's where my family was from, actually. He was from Chicago, and apparently they'd been trying to get him to come for 10 years, and he was there. He got up and he started to speak. He said, "I'm so happy to be here with all these shining faces, that have come to the Torah through the hard work of the people who are here teaching and creating community." And the Rabbi Feller, was trying to get me to come for the last 10 years. This was the first time I could come. So I thought, oh, wow, it's lucky that I'm here. 10 years, wow. And then he started to tell a story. And he said, he told a few stories, but then he told my story. Remember, I didn't know if there was a God. And if there was a God, he didn't care about me. So he said that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, whose yahrzeit, the anniversary of his passing, is on the 10th of Shvat, which is Friday night on Shabbat this week. So he said he used to constantly talk about hashgacha pratis, which is divine providence. And this Rabbi Hecht, Shlomo Zalman Hecht, alav shalom, he explained that the previous Rebbe used to define hashgacha pratit, divine providence, as that everything that happens to a person is meant to happen. Everything, every word he hears, every encounter he has, even every thought that pops into his mind, although the thoughts that you continue to keep in your mind and entertain, that's your free choice. But what comes into your mind is by divine providence. Even the spinning of a leaf, and how many times it spins when it falls from the tree, because God is creating the world at every instant, now and now and now and now and now. And we're all caught in this giant matrix of what looks like reality, politics aside. We need to see through it and understand that everything is fluid and everything is God. Okay, but I didn't know any of that. And he said that the previous Rebbe used to, whose yahrzeit, whose anniversary of passing it was, used to quote the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement from the mid-1700s, who would say that everything a person hears, he's meant to hear. Everything that he sees, he's meant to see. And especially if something affects him in a meaningful way, that was custom created for him, to give him a lesson, to give him a teaching, to move him forward. Okay, so I'm sitting in this audience of about 80 people listening to all these stories, and then this rabbi says, during the war years in Chicago, Chicago, that's where my family's from, my grandparents. I was very close to my grandfather. He told me amazing stories about his life in Ashishak, in this tiny town in Poland, Lithuania, that was destroyed completely in the Holocaust. He was left there at the age of 6. And with his little 5-year-old brother, his parents came to America to make money to bring the family over. And they were learning in the cheder, in the religious school, these 2 little boys. And they ate in people's houses. It was a very poor village. They were hungry, they were cold. In the end, their parents finally brought the whole family over, and everybody who remained in that town, in that shtetl, was destroyed in the Holocaust. So that was, as hard as it was a great, miraculous thing. Anyway, he used to tell me these stories, in Chicago, when I still lived in Chicago, before we moved to Minnesota. So this Rabbi Hecht said that among those we had, in the war years, years of the Holocaust, we had a fund called Karen Hatzalah, where we collected money from various people and took it to the refugees. It was right after the war, I guess, or during the war, and to help them. And he said among those who was there at the time, who was running the fund, a part of the fund in Chicago, was a man by the name of Reb Shmuel Breda. I'm sitting there, remember, I'm insignificant, and I don't know if there's a God, and we're talking about divine providence. And it's even more complex, but I won't go into it now. And I'm like, that's my grandfather. That's Grandpa, who passed away years before. And I started crying. And he goes on and tells this long story, continuously mentioning his name, and all about how my grandfather, Reb Breda, was one of the delegations in the delegation to bring the money to Russia, to the suburbs of France, and to Israel. And it turns out that in the suburbs of France where he went, I guess it was the town of Brunois. He didn't say so, but I found that out later. So this was like in 1947. So there he was talking to people. I'm not telling the story in Rabbi Hecht's words anymore because it takes too long, but he explained that my grandfather, he didn't know it was my grandfather, had gone to distribute this money and was talking to the elderly people and the middle-aged and the young. And then he said he went, when he came back, he told us, Rabbi Hecht said, that at random he went to a little boy and he said, little boy, I am going back to America. Is there anything that you would want very, very much that I could give to you? These people were refugees. And this little boy said, I want to have the merit, the merit to grow up and go to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe someday, to meet him. And this was very moving, apparently, for my grandfather, as Rabbi Hecht is telling. Remember, Rabbi Hecht is telling this story to this group of Chabad people, with me, not religious, in the audience, and wondering about everything. And he's telling it as an example of how powerful the relationship is between the Rebbe and his followers. Because this is the previous Rebbe who had moved to Poland. In other words, without the details, go look it up. I don't want to take too much time for you. But anyway, these people hadn't seen him. They were in one place. He was in another place for decades already. He said, if a Rebbe can leave such an impression on his followers, my grandfather told Rebbe Hecht, if a Rebbe could, and he was not a chassid at all. He was an opponent of the Chassidic movement, actually, known as a misnagid, until this story happened. So he said, if a Rebbe can leave such an impression that even the little children grow up and all they want when they have nothing, no food, no clothes, no toys, is to see the Rebbe someday, that is a relationship that the world has never seen. So that's one point of the story. Okay, after the story was told, I'm skipping a lot of details, but after it was done, I went up to the podium and I introduced myself. And, it was very emotional. And I said, is there anything else you could tell me about my grandfather? He had passed away years before, and I wasn't religious. I didn't understand what his passion was for Judaism, although I knew he had it. I thought it was older people, like grandparents, that believed in God and the Torah. I didn't know that there was such a thing as a revival of the Jewish souls and all of humanity to connect to the deeper reality beyond the matrix. But there was, and there is, and it's accelerating every second. So he told me that he said, I wasn't really friends with your grandfather. He was way older than me. I didn't know at that time that my grandfather had been a big opponent to the Chabad presence in Chicago, although that all changed with this story. He said, though, he did ask me if he could meet the previous Rebbe after this happened to him. He was so impressed. So I took him to New York, and the Rebbe had been tortured by the Stalinists. So he was crippled and he was hard for him to speak. It was hard to get an audience to see him. He said, I took your grandfather in, and he had a private audience. And when he came out, he told me it was the most incredible experience of his life. Then he said, and this is kind of the punchline, because think about it, you think about confidentiality with a lawyer, a doctor, a priest, whatever, a rabbi, a spiritual leader, how much more so a Rebbe. But after meeting with my grandfather, the Rebbe called Rabbi Hecht into his office, and he said, Reb Breda was by me today, and I asked him about his business affairs, and then I asked him, and thus to an Ira Kinder, what are your children doing? And my grandfather had 6 children. My mother was the baby. And all of them had left religion, had left Judaism, Jewish observance, as they got into their teen years and went to college and whatever. So he burst into tears. Rabbi Hecht is telling me this because the previous Rebbe told him hidden secrets. He said, your grandfather burst into tears. And it was your grandfather's tears by the Rebbe that brought you and your brother back, because the Rebbe told me that he promised your grandfather that he would have, it's called Yiddish Nachas, he would have spiritual fulfillment, Jewish fulfillment from his grandchildren, even though he didn't from his children. So this story, there are 3 points I want to make, because we're on the topic of busting from the matrix, and the matrix is a fractal. It exists on many levels. Number 1, the power of a Rebbe, not only to leave an impression, but the Rebbe promised my grandfather in 1947, before my parents ever were married. Okay, he promised that he would have grandchildren who were Torah observant. How did he know? Because a Rebbe sees the souls, because he's the central soul of all of humanity, the central soul of all of humanity. That's what we're celebrating this week. And that means that everything that unfolds, like I said yesterday, comes through that central soul for you and for nations and for the world, because really we're all one. Okay, that's the part that contains all of us. And like I said yesterday, each of us have a spark in ourselves of that central soul. That's number 1. So on that level, all souls are seen, past and future. Everything is seen, everything is known. But it has to play itself out in time and space, because that's where we're living for the reasons of our mission, which is to create a dwelling place, reveal God, a world of heaven and earth in this physical world of time and space. That's where God is meant to be fully experienced and manifest. Likewise, your own essence, your own soul. Okay, that's 1. Number 2 is the idea of the divine providence. If you can see how the world's being created every instant. I don't even have time to tell you how I almost wasn't there, like until the last minute, how it was 10 years that they tried to get him there. And then at the last minute, I decided to I didn't even know about the gathering, but I decided to be in the neighborhood for Shabbat. And then whatever, like the odds of my being there at that time when he was there were nil, or 1 in, I don't know, billions. And yet I was there. The divine providence of that this story never was told to anybody. And then it was told to this audience. He told several stories prior to this one. This was the last story. And in none of them did he mention the name of the person he was talking about. The story about my grandfather, he mentioned it several times, even mentioned the name of his business. So there would be no doubt to me that this is my grandfather. Okay, so and he didn't know. So the third aspect is, that second is divine providence. The third aspect is the fact that when the Rebbe, God, I'm not saying the Rebbe God, but when a great tzaddik, or any person who God is working through, because each one of us is a messenger of God, right? We just don't have the clarity on that yet as a great tzaddik, as a Rebbe. But when God wants to send a message through a tzaddik or through anyone, that message will come out when it's supposed to. So that story waited to be told until I was sitting there and needed to hear it. And Rabbi Hecht was only in his 50s, the rabbi who came and told the story, but he passed away within 3 months of telling the story. If I hadn't been there at that moment, if he hadn't mentioned the names, if he'd chosen another one of probably the hundreds of stories that he knew and told, or any of many other possibilities, it never would have happened. So that's when, that's when my life turned around. I was literally hit on the head with a spiritual experience. But what that teaches all of us, I hope, and that's why so many people use this story, even though they don't know me. It's in a couple of books. They use the story, when they celebrate this yard site of the previous Rebbe, because it speaks so clearly to the power of a Rebbe. It speaks so clearly to the idea of the journey of the souls and our destiny, and how we're all connected in that way, and how God communicates with us and takes us every step, every place we go, every person we meet, every circumstance we experience is directly given to us from above. Likewise, everything that's happening in the world now. Everything that's happening in the world is divine. Does it all look divine? Totally not. Because we're in a spiritual war. What is the spiritual war? To distinguish good from evil, to find God in everything, to wake up out of the matrix. I talk about the great awakening of the souls, because that's what's up right now. To open your eyes, I quote the Rebbe, and see Geula. And that means to see where Geula is manifesting, even if the people who are playing that role don't realize it, and where the darkness needs to be recognized and pushed away. Because in the spiritual war, it's about God, anti-God. It's about redemption, imprisonment, enslavement. But the snake, which is still part of the human psyche, still entangled in everything that we have, although that's changing. That's about to change big time. But its biggest tool is it pits us against each other. Oh, that's red flag number 5. Are we pitted against each other? Are we angry? That's a red flag that we're not in reality, that we're in the matrix. Weaponized anger, weaponized judgment, weaponized guilt, weaponized fear, censorship, manipulation, division. All of these are toxic and big warning signs. Will point you to falsehood and truth. And that is your job, to learn, to go deeper, to discern. Remember what we're brought up with. I said this in the beginning, what we're used to feels like reality to us. I'll say one more thing. I listened to a short interview from I guess it was just a couple days ago. It was recorded in the 80s with a former KGB intelligence person who had defected to the West. And he said that when they want to take down a society into communism, or let's just say into totalitarianism, so there's a strategic way that they do it. The first thing is they spend 20 or 30 years demoralizing people, making life really hard, making them feel that their efforts are futile. We're taught that was part of the slavery in Egypt, about his perech, that everybody felt like that the work was not satisfying. It never accomplished. You could never get there. Don't you feel like you can never really get there? That's fostered in the Matrix. That's part of our Truman Show. Our Truman Show is not so much fun as it was for Truman. Okay? That is part of the grand illusion that is being deliberately, by the snake forces in this spiritual war, pushed upon us. So you demoralize the people until they don't have a sense of self. They can't trust themselves. They don't feel empowered. They feel like they can't trust each other. They can't trust their institutions. They get apathetic. Then you provide some distractions, eating, drinking, sleeping, TV, whatever. We have a lot of distractions. I remember one time when the government, the Obama administration, the government actually gave a subsidy. They wanted to, I don't know if you remember this, but I noticed it, and so did my husband, that they took away the antenna, the TVs with the antennas, and they wanted everybody to go digital, and they actually gave a subsidy for buying a TV. How come? Of all the things we need subsidies for. So I'll leave that to your imagination. But this is real, as hard as it is to believe. 5 years ago, I couldn't believe anything. Well, 8 years ago, however many years ago it was. Well, I guess it started in 2007. But it's been a journey. But things are accelerating. So your job is to look deeper. Your job is to recognize God. Your job is to learn to discern the red flags and to know the difference between truth and falsehood, because that is part of the unfolding of the snake, the debugging of humanity. What is the debugging of humanity? To recognize when we are being run internally by that little voice and the false beliefs, in our families by passing on fear-based behaviors that are toxic, to our kids, to our spouse, to ourselves, in communities and nations. It's all a virus. It's all like a cosmic autoimmune. What is the core of that, in simple terms? When the system cannot recognize what it is really it and what is actually assaulting it. So what is you and what is assaulting you? That is your job right now. And if I can help, I'm here to help. Happy Zion Shvat, 7th of Shvat, happy Yud Shvat, happy days are coming. That's the truth. Keep the faith. Lots of love.